So hopefully you can all see my slides now. So what I want to do just in this first talk is very quickly say a little bit about what EODEM is, for those of you who don't know. Some of you I know were at the introductory session we had last week, and in which case I apologize, there will be some overlap, but I am also saying new things today as well. And I'll also just say a little bit about why we chose LIDO as our as the data standard that we adopted for the EODEM project. Sorry, clicker not doing clicky things. There we go. So our aim is very simple in the EODEM project. It's to make it possible to export object exhibition data from a lender's collections management system at the touch of a button, and then import that data into a borrower's system produced by a different software vendor just as easily. So we should start with an object that is recorded in a database. The object's lender would open their collections management system and find the record for that object. They would press the EODEM export button and an EODEM file would be created. They would then email that file to the borrower, and the borrower would receive the email and save the file. They in turn would open their CMS, they would press the EODEM import button, and the data would be stored in their database. And the aim is that it is as simple as that. There may be things to complicate it along the way, but we want to keep it at that kind of basic level of simplicity. Why are we doing this? Well, a huge amount of time is spent copying and pasting, or even worse, retyping object information between collections management systems and forms or emails. I looked into this at the National Gallery in London, which is where I work, and our best estimate is that over the last 10 years, we've entered an average of 405 loan object records a year into our collections management system. We use TMS. So assuming that it takes about 10 to 15 minutes for each entry, this equates to somewhere between 16 and 22 days a year entering exhibition object data into TMS. So over the 10 years that we were looking at this, that's a total of somewhere between 164 and 224 days, potentially an entire working year over the last 10 years spent on data entry. And that ignores the work that we do providing information for loans out. Now, we're a large national organization. We do have an ambitious exhibitions program, but we're not atypical of large museums. So turning to our need for a data standard, we very quickly agreed that if possible for the EODEM project, we need some sort of framework into which people will put their data so that the consuming systems can understand it. And we very quickly agreed that if possible, we should use an existing standard. First of all, people have thought long and hard about them, and there's absolutely no point doing all that work again. We are, after all, the CIDOC Documentation Standards Working Group, so it would make sense to use a standard. So we had certain criteria for the standard that we were going to adopt. It had to be well established, and it should already have been incorporated into at least some collections management systems. Well, there were a couple of obvious candidates. CIDOC's standard for lightweight information describing objects, LIDO, which had recently been incorporated into several systems as part of the Europeana Inside project, and Collections Trust's Spectrum. Now, we know that Spectrum Partners systems comply with that, but we were specifically interested in the interoperable version, Spectrum XML. So we reviewed our draft units of information against the current version of LIDO 1.0. This was in February this year. And with some help from Gordon McKenna, thank you, Gordon, what was then the most recent version of Spectrum XML, which was 4.0. Neither standard contained all the units of information we required. LIDO, which is primarily designed to deliver data for aggregated online collections, lacked collection management information. Spectrum did rather better in this area, but a lot of the more granular fields were often covered just by one sort of general free text field, and some fields were still missing. Crucially, LIDO's data model, based around events related to objects, seemed more flexible. It would allow us to create generic event types like display of object or transport of object, and attach descriptions and measurements to them using the generic description and measurement fields within LIDO. Our choice was certainly influenced by our experience with the recent Art UK data harvesting pilot, with which both Knowledge Integration and the Modes User Association, who have been involved in our ongoing discussions, were involved with that pilot. I was one of the members of the steering group. And our data ingest profile, which was developed by Rob Tice of Knowledge Integration, the profile that he developed for the Art UK harvesting pilot used LIDO, and he extended it by using generic events. So knowing that this was possible and that we had some practical knowledge of how to do it, we chose LIDO as our data structure. However, some of our requirements contradicted the LIDO standard, and so we needed to extend LIDO to meet our requirements in some way. But how to do this? Well, we had, I think, three options. One was to coordinate the development of an extension with the LIDO working group. The second was to develop our own extension and submit it retrospectively to the LIDO working group for incorporation into LIDO. And the third was to just go our own way, to develop our own extension entirely independently, so that an EODEM record drew upon both the standard and its own EODEM-specific fields. Well, that last option seemed needlessly complicated. The second option, developing our own extension and submitting it retrospectively, was risky. Would all our proposals be accepted? If not, then we ended back with being in that third option with our own extension. So our first option, coordinating development, was both simplest and safest. Luckily, LIDO was in the process of being revised. A draft version 1.1 was issued for comment in April this year. And Regina Stein, the chair of the LIDO working group, had heard about the EODEM project through the CIDOC board and offered to work with us a couple of days before we met and decided that collaboration really was the sensible thing to do. So she joined our monthly working group meetings to help us work with LIDO and to feed back our detailed questions to the LIDO working group. And I will talk about the questions we resolved together after Regina has told us something about things from her perspective. Thank you.